Hey everybody, this is Dawn Marie Solis with Neuro Awesome Life, and I am here with Jacki Edry, who I've been getting to know over the last couple of weeks, and I'm so excited. Jacki's actually joining us from Israel, which thank you, gigantic time difference. I really appreciate it. Jacki is a neurodivergent advocate and author, identifies as neurodistinct, is a parent of neurodistinct children. I love that, by the way, Jacki, neurodistinct. I love that so much. I'm going to be thinking about that. Do you care if people steal that? Is that like a term you
Yeah,
hold
I didn't make it up. It's
goes
it's
on in the
a
world? Okay,
term
great.
that's becoming
You're
more
distinct.
familiar and used. Yeah, so
I
for
like that
sure.
a lot.
hmm
Um, Jacki, as I don't have the title of your book written down,
hmm
so I'm on my note card. Oh, you can't see that because there you go. I'm on my note card. Um, can you tell us a little bit about you and then lead into the title of your book and what your book's about?
Sure. All
Thank-
right. So my name's Jacki Edry. I am living in Israel. I grew up in the States. I've always been a little bit of a nonlinear, a lot of a nonlinear thinker, um, but it was not diagnosed as anything specifically neurodistinct or uniquely neurodistinct as I grew up. But that was quite a while ago. So probably they weren't looking at things too much then, although I did prefer alternative education. And when I was in high school, I started working with my first autistic child and absolutely fell in love with him. And then went to university, and my college was an alternative college as well, and we got to pick our own program and own thesis. And during the time when I was planning to be a vet, but during that time I started working in summer camps with autistic kids as well. And I realized sort of halfway through that I was actually more destined to work with autistic kids and neurodivergent kids than to be a veterinarian. And I wound up doing a thesis on educational programs for autistic kids, um, and particularly looking at how natural forms of intervention. And I worked with them in summer camps, and we did whitewater canoeing and all kinds of wonderful things, lots of exercise, and how that was a very child-centered approach and very regular approach without specific training. And then I went to do my thesis at a school that was a behavior modification school, which was sort of the early days. It's what they called ABA. And during that time, I was going to check how the exercise helped kids with stimming, because I noticed that kids, when they do a lot of exercise, they tend to have a need to stim less. And I thought that was very interesting to look at. But when I went there, I realized that the behavioral techniques that they were using did not suit my belief system. And I was very saddened to see the state of the kids that were in that school, which had a wonderful reputation, by the way. But I even had the opportunity there to work with a child who had actually worked with us when he was young, when I was in high school, in a different state altogether. And he was very stuck and very sad and frustrated. So I changed my thesis to different types of educational programs, and not supporting the behavioral types of intervention. I really thought things back then were based on sensory type of things as well. And I graduated, and then I moved to Israel, and I very much I felt my heart was in Israel, which is why I left New York and moved to Israel and got married. And then my oldest son, I realized, either had a hearing impairment or was autistic. And when I did his hearing test, it came out okay. I realized he was autistic. And I was very fortunate that I had the previous knowledge as how to work with it. Um, and we weren't going to go down that behavioral route with him, only child-centered approaches. And so I went along and had other children, and my son started growing up. And then 11 years ago, um, I wasn't feeling well, and I started losing hearing in my left ear, and no one could figure out what was wrong with me. And they did an MRI and found that I had a whopping tumor on my brainstem. had gone into my ear canal, fortunately, or I probably wouldn't be speaking with you right now. And, and I had immediate surgery. And when I woke up, all of my senses were scrambled. And it was a very harrowing experience and a very long recovery. 11 years past, but I still have plenty of things that I'm still working on. But the first 4 years were probably the most difficult until I discovered Irlen spectral filters, which is what you can see. I'm wearing dark glasses right now. These are custom colors that suit my neurological needs, and they improve the quality of my life. So as I was healing, I also realized that the things that I've been observing with my kids and with the kids I'd worked with, and as a parent, as a professional, because I've been working with parents as well along the way, um, that I now was experiencing them firsthand. And I was given a unique opportunity to be on both sides of the coin. And I had a lot of understanding that I thought would be helpful to other people. So I decided to write a book about my journey. And my book is called Moving Forward: Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery, and Faith. Now, faith is part of it because I grew up in a non-religious background, but I was always led by some internal power that I wasn't sure what it was. And as time went on, I realized that it was faith. I do not try and convince people to be religious in my book, but it is my perspective. It has a little bit of an angle, so I do give some background about faith. And certainly belief and faith and prayer were a great part of my healing process. So I detail that as well in my book. And so I wrote my book 3 years ago, and I launched a blog right after because not everything fits in a book. And I've been doing speaking engagements and things like that as well to try and spread the insights and knowledge that I've gained over the years to as many people as possible to help people improve the quality of life. And that's kind of my journey.
That's amazing. Uh, you and I related a little bit over, so I didn't have a brain tumor, but I do have long-term impacts from a traumatic brain injury
Mm-hmm.
and relate a little bit to being sensorially scrambled.
Yeah.
I still don't hear music quite right, which as a trained musician, vocalist, not being able to hear music in tune with itself. So
Mm,
music often sounds dissonant to me when it's not supposed to.
mm,
Um, so
it's
it gets in the
interesting.
way of me being able to sing because I often can't match the note anymore. I was not born with perfect pitch, but if I'm practicing, you can
Yeah.
say sing me a middle C, I can sing a middle C, sing me an F, I can sing it.
And
Um,
if you play music, just curious now that you say
yeah,
it,
yeah.
um, if we're to use some sort of this, is it an auditory processing issue you're having, or is it damage to nerve?
It appears to be processing.
So
Um,
you might want to try. I don't know if you've looked into it, but it's been incredibly helpful. My son, my son has very severe auditory processing problems, and he can't distinguish also the background noise from speech. He very and a slight delay. He had viral meningitis when he
oh
was
wow.
young. He's diagnosed autistic, but I believe a lot of his symptoms are due to his auditory processing issues.
Hmm.
And recently, he's 26 now. We've gotten him low gain hearing aids. And what low gain hearing aids do, and I learned about them on the internet from Dr. Ray Stout, who has a Facebook group. It's very active. And what they do is they just turn the volume up a tiny bit. His hearing is, if he tests a regular hearing test, he's in perfect range, but
Hmm.
he's not processing properly. And the low grade hearing aid, because he has a very high quality hearing aid, and the new high quality aids have good sound filters. So what his brain is not processing, the hearing aid processes, and now he can distinguish sounds and actually follow conversation, which he was unable to do beforehand, even though he tested in normal range. which has been miraculous because it's in the last year. Suddenly he's able to follow a conversation. And all these years of not being able to do that and actually participate, not without a delay of. Sometimes you could ask him something and he would answer a minute later because it took him that long to process, whether it be that he thinks in pictures before he uses words. And so he has to understand what was said, translate the pictures, translate back, and then put his mouth in gear. And that was so many different factors. It could take a good minute to answer. And
Interesting.
that
Yeah.
time frame has gone down to almost normal, regular response time since
Wow.
he's had his hearing aids. Yeah, yeah, it's an absolute miracle.
That's
So you might
amazing.
want to look into that.
I'll definitely
And there's
consider
another
that.
thing that,
I'm slotted for speech therapy. There's a specific kind of speech therapy, and the brain injury has impacted, like, we'll
mm-hmm,
probably get through
sure.
the day without noticing it too much. But
Right.
sometimes I just have to stop and wait
Oh,
for
yeah.
my brain to tell my mouth what to do.
I get stuck. I absolutely get stuck.
Um,
Sometimes I stutter.
yeah,
Sometimes
I stutter and
things come
stammer
out
a
weird.
lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Or sometimes, which is the weirdest thing that happens when I'm really tired, um, is I can hear myself talking, but it feels like somebody else's mouth, someone else is talking. It's not me. It's like there's a distance between the connection between my brain and my
yeah.
mouth. That's really weird. I don't like when that happens. I go to sleep. That's not a good feeling at
Yes,
all.
I've
Um,
experienced that as well. And no, it's
oh,
not.
it's just weird.
It's a very odd dissociative
Yeah,
moment.
yeah,
And uh,
yeah.
yeah,
You're cognitively present, but it's like something just not connecting. Yeah, very very unusual stuff. Um, so anyway, that and there's another technology that's called nuance technology. They have a device that was developed for ADHD, but actually, they're an Israeli company, a concept, and repurposed it um, for APD, auditory processing stuff, where it looks like a little iPod and AirPod, what do you call it? iRobot, sorry. It looks like a little iRobot, but it's like palm size, and you put it on your desk, and you can pick up where you want to hear the sound coming from. And so, like in a lecture, you can connect, either hear the teacher or you can hear the classroom, depending on which you want. And you put it in your ear, and it directs the sound. That has you plug in an earphone, and you can pick up where you want to hear the sound from, and then directs it right into your ear. So I have one of my kids who also has an APD uses it in his classroom. He doesn't need a hearing aid. It's not severe like my oldest son's, but it does enable them to participate in a conversation and not lose words and follow the teacher without getting lost. So there's
that's
cool stuff
so
out there
interesting.
that
There
can make
is
life
cool
easier.
stuff out there, and I love adaptive technology. Um,
Sure.
I'm a technology nerd.
Mm-hmm.
I love technology, period. But the adaptive tech space, uh, there's I especially love startups, people who are trying to innovate in that
Sure.
space.
Sure.
Um, so it's very exciting stuff. Thank you. I was writing it down on other
Yeah,
cards.
I can send you the links after, and then you could put them in the notes after if you want to
Thank
know.
you. Yes, links are wonderful. Links to
Mm-hmm.
your book, links to anything you want. We will put those in
Sure.
the description of this video.
Okay.
Um, One of the things that I really enjoyed, Jackie, when you and I were talking the first time, um, you just did it, right? Like I said a thing, and you immediately had like research you've done, things you've tried. Um, and you mentioned briefly when you were introducing yourself the fact that you wear darker glasses. I think that
Yeah.
the average person doesn't know what you know, and I would love for you to share about what what the situation is that causes the glasses to be a benefit.
Okay.
You found an individual in a group that gave you good information. Like
Sure.
that whole
Okay.
journey was really not just interesting, but I felt uh, I related to and wanted to look more into. So
Sure.
would
Okay.
love to hear more about that.
All right. I actually dedicated an entire chapter in my book to that about visual processing because visual processing is like 70% of our sensory input. It's the most powerful sense. And if your visual processing is off, then everything else is going to be off. Now, my visual processing was severely impaired after my surgery. I wound up in a position where I could be looking at somebody and their face would melt or split. I could be walking down a sidewalk and it would look like it was going up. I would get vertigo on stairwells, and I had to keep my eyes closed. I would get nauseous in cars and dizzy, vertigo. So I mean, I was severely impaired and
Yeah,
also exhausted all day long. And it turns out that in addition to some minor nerve damage, between the communication between our auditory system and our visual system, eye movements, which they saccades, I think they call it in English. I don't know getting the Hebrew word, but I think it's called saccades in English. And the new movements, they keep your vestibular system intact. So I have some damage during that in that system, but basically the major problem was my brain was not processing and perceiving light properly.
yeah,
And so if I went to, and I went to doctors, ophthalmologists, I went to neuro-ophthalmologists, and no one was picking up on what was going on. It turns out there's something called Irlen Syndrome, Irlen, and you can go to irlen.com and learn about it, named after Helen Irlen, who discovered it. And basically, what happens is our brains don't process parts of the color spectrum properly. And if you put a colored filter on, um, it will correct what your brain is not processing properly. And
that's been
many
one of the most
people,
interesting things about the visual problems that I have since the accident is
yeah,
I know I'm not seeing color the way I used to. And
I
sometimes
would
I feel
absolutely
like
get
I'm
checked.
not seeing color. Like I can still
You,
tell you that's green or whatever, but there's a kind of a mushiness to all of it. I don't know if
right,
that's
right.
good.
I
Like
understand.
it all kind of mushes in together and
Yeah, that
the
sounds similar to what you said about your auditory system. If
yes.
you think about it,
Yeah.
and oftentimes, even if you haven't had a traumatic brain injury or brain surgery, but people are diagnosed with ADHD or autism or dyslexia,
All three.
those three uh, actually sometimes, and I think a lot of people, a really lot of people, and I can vouch for two of my children who were diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD that do not have dyslexia. They have Irlen syndrome because it
Huh.
can cause the things like the letters to move around or the visual field to be unstable. And then it looks like dyslexia and dyscalculia, but it's actually not. And the minute they got a colored lens, their visual field stabilized. So it's it's going to be miraculous. And unfortunately, the medical system, neither the neurologists or the ophthalmologists will uh, refer you to an Irlen specialist. They will tell you to take Ritalin, which won't help. They will try and give you prism glasses and all these other things, or eye exercises, which won't help. And I know it won't help because I did all of those things. My kids did not do the Ritalin because I realized it was sensory and there was no Ritalin will make a child perhaps sit, but it will not solve the sensory problem. So it's giving them an antibiotic if they have a virus. It's not going to solve the problem.
Right.
So in the Irlen testing, it's usually two-phase test. The first, if you have Irlen, they use colored overlays and things like that. But then if you test for a lens, the lens is custom color. Okay, so they'll go through all the different colors of the spectrum, and you put them in front of your eye, and then you see which one is most comfortable, and then you do a second layer, a third layer, as many layers as you need, and then they create a custom color. So mine happened to look like dark sunglasses, but I do have one child with purple lenses. I have one child with yellow lenses, um, and one person sort of a very light brownish gray. So it's really totally depends on the neurology, and it also can change with hormones or age or time. But Irlen is also tends to be genetic, so that if one person in the family has it, oftentimes more. I do have four children with Irlen glasses. I
Hmm.
don't know if I had a mild case when I was younger because I never had any reading issues. I did have issues with depth perception at night when I was growing up. So perhaps I had a mild case, but once I had my surgery, I had very severe and TBIs can also cause that, and hormone
Yeah.
changes can also cause that.
Yeah,
So,
and I've had the eye doctors say, well, we could get you the prism glasses, but once you start with them, you can't go back. And, they
right,
warned
but
me away from the prism glasses. And
my kids were having, because they don't know how to stabilize the visual field. But the fact is that it's not, and also my kids did years of eye exercises and things like that, and remedial instruction. The thing was, none of that worked.
right.
But the minute they got their visual field stabilized, then suddenly their remedial instruction worked and they were able to close the gaps. One of my kids, and they had remedial instruction all their life, was in the middle of 11th grade when he got his early. And the other one was in 5th grade, and neither of them could read. They knew technically what to do, but not read more than about two paragraphs. And they also other things.
Well, I think we're having a little trouble broadcasting from
Um,
Israel. Wait, I lost you there.
yes, I saw that you froze. Did you hear what I was saying, or should I
No,
repeat?
we couldn't hear you. So up
Where'd you lose me?
until 11th grade and
Okay,
fifth
so
grade,
I
and
had
then
one.
after that,
Okay, so I had one child in 11th grade and one child in 5th grade that could not, and they had remedial instruction all of their lives and eye exercise because they had a slight low muscle tone in their eyes. And so one of their eyes would sort of go out to the side. None of that helped. The neurologist, they had diagnosed with ADHD. I was fighting with the neurologist because I didn't want to give them Ritalin. That I was fighting with the schools who were pushing because although none of my kids were problematic behaviorally and they would sit nicely in class, they weren't able to perform. They weren't able to keep up. And they were even trying to um, push them into some sort of special education, although they were obviously cognitively very high.
hmm.
And there were the teachers that refused to understand, and they would say they're just lazy because they could
Yep.
tell by speaking with them that they were very high. But at the same time, their performance on a test, I can tell you that if they've been given accommodations in oral exams, which they refuse to do because they say young children shouldn't have them and blah, 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 there was a difference between 30 and 50%, 30 to 50 points on every exam. And if a kid knows that could get a 90 and they wind up getting a 50, the next time they're going to want to study. So lots of kids also misdiagnosed. Lots of kids want to drop out. Lots of kids hate school. Lots of kids are bullied for being stupid, which mine were,
Yeah.
all because their visual field was not stable and the teachers did not understand it. And nobody referred the kids to get Irlen tested. So if I have one thing to say to any parent, or any professional of that matter, if a child has any sort of slowness and they get in that didactic assessment and you can see they have some visual issues, reading issues, any kind of delay, before you do anything else, get Irlen tested because that way, if you fix it, they might not develop the delays that the older kids get. My fifth grader with some remedial instruction, the minute he got his lenses, became a bookworm
Hmm.
within 3 months. My 11th grader doesn't enjoy reading to date, but he does. My second grader did not develop the academic gaps that his siblings. And the self-image and everything else, social situations are completely different if a child is sensory intact and can function. They do not have the difficulties that a child, or the relationships. Kids relate to them differently. The teachers relate to them differently if they don't have those gaps. And by
Yeah.
the way, I started to say when it blacked out that they couldn't track a ball or things like that either. So what never made sense to me why my son, who was athletic, was lousy at soccer and all the kids would make fun of him.
Yeah.
Well, it turned out he'd see the ball and then it would disappear from his visual field and then it would whack him in the head.
Mm-hmm.
Or he would kick it thinking he's kicking to the goalpost, but actually his visual field was so unstable that it would look like it was a couple of feet away. So he'd kick in the wrong direction, assuming that it was perfectly fine. So it's incredible. It affects every single aspect of their lives, and also their other senses calm down, and they were overall more calm because when you have too much light and hypersensitivity, you also get too much blood flow to the brain, which gives you those jitters you see with ADHD. So the minute you put on the lenses and it regulates the blood flow, the other senses calm down too. So it's and I have
Fascinating.
seed pairs. Most of my children are diagnosed with now correctly diagnosed as opposed to ADHD and dyslexia. They are now with Irlen and APD because that also disguises itself as attention issues. Because if you miss a word or two every sentence or every paragraph, then you can't follow the conversation and you get lost in class and then you start dreaming. Because you've zoned out to try and figure out what the teacher has said or what you missed, and by the time you zone back in, she's already on another topic, and you get lost within 10 minutes. You have no clue what's going on, and it's also very, very hard to try and keep yourself focused. It takes all of your cognitive resources to decode, and if you have it in visual and auditory sense, by 10 in the morning, you're spent. You cannot
Right.
function in school, and that's what happens with these kids. And there's so many solutions out there to make it easier, whether it be a low gain hearing aid or the technology I mentioned before, and an acoustic classroom. And if there's auditory coordination problems, you can get a typing and and Irlen lenses, and you suddenly you free all those technical difficulties from your child, and they'll be able to learn in class and actually be freed up as to think as opposed to decode, which is a totally different situation.
I'm so grateful to have met you. You're so willing to share your experience and your knowledge. I'm really, really grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Important stuff.
Mm.
I think it's 2 years now. So I was told I was dyslexic when I was 15. I'm 55 years old. When I was 15, the only
Mm-hmm.
thing we knew about dyslexia was read with your finger or an index card,
Yeah,
right?
I was doing that with my kids for years. Yeah.
And for me, it definitely helped. But we know now that though dyslexia can mess with your ability to read if you don't know your brain,
Right.
dyslexia is actually a brain designed for three-dimensional thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And what goes wrong is you look at a page of text and your brain goes, well, that's not three-dimensional. Let me help you. Right?
Uh-huh.
And it picks everything up and tries to rearrange it so that
Sure.
it becomes something your brain is designed to process. But we don't
Mm-hmm.
need it to do that. We need it to leave it alone. It's a different kind of puzzle.
Right.
We need a
Well, there are times
three-dimensional
it's very
puzzle.
advantageous to do that, but you need to be able to control the situation when you want to do it and when you
Right.
don't.
And I love my brain. And now that I understand it better, I
Mm-hmm.
can train myself on how to love my brain and live in cooperation with
Mm-hmm.
its design.
Mm-hmm.
The reading bit that that was complicated by the way I was taught to read.
Mm-hmm.
I was without my parents' knowledge, they were lied to. And so were evidently parents in about 32 states back in the day. There was this federal education experiment, and they taught us to read by seeing the shapes of words instead
Oh,
of
okay.
sounding
All
them
right.
out, individual letters, things like that,
Uh-huh.
which for my 3D brain actually worked really well.
Mm-hmm.
Short amount of time
Right.
because you have to be taught every word, right?
Exactly.
And some
Mm-hmm.
words have the same shape.
Right.
So I would read, how they decided I was dyslexic is I would read out loud and sometimes it wouldn't make sense. And I
Mm-hmm.
was so focused on trying to figure out the page, I wasn't processing if it was making sense. I
Mm-hmm.
would
Sure.
say things that
Decoding as opposed to
if I'd
thinking.
heard it, I'd be like, why are you saying that? But I was
Right,
just
right, right.
focused on like,
You,
I was terrified to read out loud. I knew I screwed up. Um,
yeah,
and so for
100%.
me,
Mm-hmm.
hearing about Irlen's syndrome and understanding that I am actually dyslexic because now I understand the function of a
Mm-hmm.
dyslexic neurotype, right? We so
Mm-hmm.
often look at the deficits.
Right.
And I think when we're deficits focused, that's where we make the mistakes. If we were
Yeah.
function focused, right? You could talk to a child and so my way back original focus was learning modalities. How do people process? How do they take in information, process it, and give it back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learning, the internal learning process. That was my focus. Because I knew I was such a different learner and I didn't fit in standardized education at all. And I knew many people who didn't. And even though I
Yeah.
was technically successful in that environment. I did very well. It was exhausting and traumatizing to a level I
Yeah.
can't explain, right?
I got
While
you.
I was
You
always
don't
the
have to
happy
explain it to
kid.
me because I was just like that. I did
Right,
extremely
right.
well in eight. No, no, no. Yeah.
So I was desperate to figure out what standardized education wouldn't admit.
Right.
And I spent my college career trying to do that. And after my college career, um, when I finally figured out somewhere around the age of turning 50 that I was also autistic ADHD and a couple of other uh,
Mm-hmm.
different neurotypes, I was able to start putting pieces together for myself, but also recognizing the importance of function first. What is this
Mm-hmm.
neurotype designed for? Right? I
Right.
often use the example of different sizes of hammer. You've got
Mm-hmm.
the teeny tiny hammer to do little detail work,
Mm-hmm.
little teeny tiny, right? Very gentle. And then you've got
Mm-hmm.
the powered jackhammer, right?
Sure.
You
Mm-hmm.
cannot use the powered jackhammer in the detail work, and you cannot use teeny tiny hammer. I mean, I suppose you can, but you're not getting through the road or
Sure.
the side of a mountain very
Mm-hmm.
quickly with your teeny tiny hammer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not that those are dysfunctional. Those hammers are perfectly functional. They're just being
Yeah.
used incorrectly, right?
Right.
Ignorance, willfulness, whatever, they're not being used correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, my advocacy in large part around uh, neurodistinctness, neurodifference, uh, is that if we start with what is sort of the baseline function of that neurotype? Now,
Mm-hmm.
all of us are going to have different abilities and uh, lesser abilities within that standard function.
Sure.
Just like some very tall people naturally play basketball, and some very tall people have no coordination whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Tall doesn't equal the ability to be fully using your body in a
Sure.
sport type way, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we assume that it does. We see a tall person, especially if we
Mm-hmm.
identify them as male. We see a tall male and we think basketball,
Sure.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We see an autistic person and we think deficit. We see an ADHD person, we think deficit. And every time we do that, we ignore the human being.
Oh yeah.
And so, one of the reasons why I got so excited about you, Jacki, is because everything you were talking to me about had to do with the human being, had to do with the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make sure we're actually seeing the person
Mm-hmm.
in front of us?
Yeah.
I know that you also have lots of perspectives on education, and that's one of my large happy places.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to sort of pivot into your perspectives on education, part of
Okay.
your journey was recognizing that corrective behavioral approaches were not where you wanted to participate. Um,
Right.
I don't like to
Okay.
personally call out specific named perspectives because that makes people lose their minds, right? But I
Hmm.
think we can talk about the concepts. What first, like what drew you away from behavioral approaches? What made you go, yeah, that's
Okay.
not how I see the world. And then what is the
Okay.
approach that you feel like would be more beneficial?
Okay. I want to backtrack a little bit though. Okay.
Yes.
Um, because sort of my work as sort of what you were saying that you do in your work, I do as well. But I try and first of all, I don't categorize. I think most people there's so much overlap with any kind of neurodivergence, neurodistinctness, neuro whatever it may be. I think the names or diagnoses are almost irrelevant in a way. I mean, you need to have them. And certainly for eligibility for services, which are imperative.
A
But
whole other topic.
yeah, but once there's whatever it may be, then I go down the route of just looking at the person and trying to assess, almost like an anthropologist or something. You know, like okay, I start with the sensory and try and think of whatever the person might need to regulate the senses as much as possible because that will help the person to be able to use whatever their innate ability may be, whether it be the 3D thinking. By the way, Irlen, sometimes a person can have Irlen and dyslexia, and sometimes a person is the misdiagnosis, or with as my kids were, but it can go together. It's not one or the other necessarily. But that's a side thing from what I wanted to say, which was so I'm all for the strengths, but I'm also for before you go down to, in order to enable the person to tap into those strengths to try and neutralize as many of those technical difficulties that are interfering with their ability to access those things as possible, which is why I go down the sensory route first and look for tools. That being said, the minute that we help the person to regulate as much as possible in the sensory arena, then we go into develop all the skills that you were talking about in the natural tendency. The school system is absolutely designed to make us all into robots on industrial, working in a biofactory or
Line.
something like
Yeah.
that. But it is not designed to make people think, and it's not designed to certainly develop skills from anybody that's not a typical, straightforward, logical, average thinker. That's it. Don't be too
Actually,
intelligent, and don't be associative thinker, and don't be anything that's out of the box. It educates everything out of us. So
and
educational
you're
system,
very correct in saying that it was designed that way. That's not just a turn
it
of.
was designed that way, but
If
the
you
problem
go
is it hasn't
back in the
changed.
history
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the documents, the lobbying of the federal government for why we have the education system that we have, they wanted good workers and obedient citizens. They did not want
And there was the
independent
time the
thinkers.
industrial revolution. It was a
Right,
time when people were working in factories and things like that. They need to learn to read, to write, and to behave themselves. And that's basically, and it hasn't evolved since,
right.
unfortunately, and for a large part. And I want to add on to that what what I told my children as they were growing up with their unique minds, particularly for the ADHD diagnosis. I would say to them, listen, your brain, I said, what would you prefer? Um, a new iPhone? How many things can a new iPhone do at a time? They're like, wow, that can do a lot. How many windows you can now open it very, very fast? Okay. Now, when I was writing my thesis per se, back in '87, I had an Apple computer. It's one of the first ones. I was, always into the technology stuff. How many things could that computer do at once? Eh, how long did it take to print something? And I'd say to the kids, okay, would you want that old computer that can do two or three things maybe at the same time and then crash? Or would you prefer the new iPhone? Now, I haven't met a kid who would say, I prefer that old computer. They all go, I want the highest. What if you don't know how to work it? What if you don't know how to work that new iPhone? Can you use it? Is it effective? No. I said, okay, what you've got with your ADHD or you can pick up everything going on in the room. Your brain's not filtering. Um, what I call it is divided attention. I don't call it not deficit and not disorder. You've got the gift of divided attention, and you also have a gift of intelligence. But if you want that gift to be usable as opposed to be distracting, you need to acquire techniques and understand how to operate that machine. But I promise you that when you do know how to do that, you're going to be as high, and you finish with the educational system, which you're not going to do. It's going to be miserable for you in a lot of ways. And, I had to fight with the educational system all through it. No, there was not one school that I would walk through the door and they would not go, oh,
Yeah.
this one again. But that's another
Yeah,
story.
all of my kids have
But
tremendous education trauma.
oh
Tremendous.
yeah, and I felt that was every day they'd come home. It was like I have to deprogram and
Yeah.
decompress and just try and save them for the emotional damage of being thought of not that. I said, I promise you, when you finish, if you work on those skills, and one of the biggest ones is time management, because time management, especially if you get I'm an illogical and associative thinker at the same time. My brain works really fast, and I go like all over the place. And if I show people, if I actually start explaining to people what I'm thinking, they're just like, oh, but
Instant.
I know people can have that much noise in their heads. I just learned to hide it so that people don't know how much noise actually is going through my brain. But younger children don't know how to do that particularly well. That's a skill set. When you're close to 60, you probably have it down pretty well. But an 8-year-old is certainly not going to have it. But I promised them that, and I can tell you that they understood that concept of divided attention, and they understood the concept of the latest iPhone, and they worked on those skills. And so it's time management, it's categories, and it's assistive technology, and it's reminders. My kid just asked me now, why do you have so many alarms on your telephone? He just I saw my phone today. I said, do me a favor. I've got a meeting. Can you set me an alarm for like a, and it's in my calendar, but that's not always enough. I know I can go off on a thinking tangent, or I can start writing, and I forget to eat, and I forget to go to the bathroom, and I set me an alarm. It happened to be my phone was in his hand, and so it's like, because I know that I need to remind myself because my brain's going to go off to who knows where. But because my brain can do that, I can come up with great ideas, and I write a blog, and I'm an educator, and I can lecture, and I can write a book, and I can connect things that the average folks can't. It's because I've developed those skills. And my two oldest kids are now finished with the education system. And one was in the army, and now he's working with youth, is doing counseling and all kinds of stuff. And my daughter's a researcher on television and journalist. And they needed all those skills that the school system is trying to say to them, no, those are not good skills. They needed to pay attention to every detail. They're excelling at whatever they do. It's because they develop the skills. But you got to work hard to develop those skills and those strengths and streamline them so that they're useful. Otherwise, they're going to be a hindrance. But if you use them, then there's significant advantage to the average folks who are going to be just sitting doing the more streamlined jobs. They're not going to be So that's what I wanted to say about.
Yeah, I'm not somebody that is antagonistic to medication, not at all. But our societal desire to medicate somebody into cooperative mindsets really disturbs me. So, you've got
It's extremely disturbing.
The little kid
plus
who,
the pharma industry will say you have ADHD, attention deficit disorder. They will say to you that the person's going to need medication for the rest of their lives. They're making so much money out of it.
right.
And every other thing that no one will send you to do the sensory and auditory and figure out what's going on.
Right.
They're giving you the treating symptom. And even if your kid is sitting, which mine sat, from the time they were in second grade, they were trying to medicate. I wouldn't do it. Now, I imagine there's a small percentage of the population. I think somewhere I read it was maybe 5%, but don't hold me on that because I'm not sure, that really has some sort of chemical imbalance that will require that medication. And they, I'm sure, but that's not what we're seeing. If we're not seeing 30 to 50% of a class having some sort of diagnosis, and I would say at least 30% of the classes in Israel that they want those kids on medication. And they're not talking about what it does to their appetite. They're not talking about what it does to their cognitive development. They're not talking about what it does with addictive tendencies. You're getting these kids on speed. And I can say that my husband he works with at-risk youth, okay? And he's been there for many, many, many years. And the kid walks in within 2 minutes. He'll tell you which kids have been on Ritalin throughout their school years and how many of them have dropped out and how many have further addictions. With a second, he knows.
Right.
He can see it. Now, nobody's going to do a study to show you that damage because it's going to affect, that would make the parents say, oh, I don't want to give that to my kid. No one will give you that. Do that study because it will damage the farm industry.
And in the States, there are schools that have
no one
won
will warn
court
the parents.
cases. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, and the farm industries aren't gonna, you know what I mean? Everyone think you just give the kid a pill and it's not going to fix the problem,
Right.
especially if it's sensory. It's a crime. It's a crime, and they're not going to warn those parents. The doctors are not going to say. That doctor did not say to me in the meeting when he was trying to convince me and my child to take these medications that there was a chance he would become addicted later on, that he would, and teaches a kid too. Whenever you have a problem, take a pill. So you have a problem. Okay, so I couldn't sit, so I took a pill. So I'm depressed today. I'm going to go take a pill for depression. It's that training a child from a very young age that if you take a pill, it's going to solve your problems, which it most likely will just compound your problems and solve it. And it's a crime. It's a real crime. Yeah. And the farm industry pisses me off more than the educational system. But,
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah, so for me, I don't want to tell anybody to not use a medication because that's not how do I know,
yeah,
right?
there is a place for it.
But we're prescribing without understanding the individual,
Exactly.
right? You can spend 5 minutes with your primary care doctor here in the United States and get prescribed uh, ADHD medication.
Sure. And that's not
Um,
right. They're not looking for
right.
the root.
The,
I
and
also
and
don't
we're not providing
misunderstand.
good training, really, right? Like, okay, you're ADHD. The only thing we're told is here, take a pill. Not you have,
Exactly.
like you just explained, you have an amazing brain, but you have to learn how to use it, right?
No, who's going to teach them how to use it?
Not the
This
schools,
the teacher who's going to say them why you're sitting and punish them for moving around
right?
instead of 5 minutes, the first 5 minutes of every class period. Believe me, if teachers, the first 5 minutes of every class period, because children are not designed to sit on their bums all day. I'm sorry, I'm being rude, but if the first 5 minutes of every class, they would have those kids stand up, stretch, and perhaps move their bodies or jump in place or whatever for 5 minutes, no more. I bet half the behavior problems in the class would disappear and these kids would focus. But they don't do that. There's no one to talk to about these things. But
Well, for one thing, they're only given 45 to 50 minutes
and half of it's
for,
dealing with behavioral issues. But why don't you do something to get rid of that? The teacher
right.
gets all these kids.
There are
They
schools
want
that have
quiet.
gone to longer class periods where
Yeah,
you can take a break, where you can
right.
move around, right? Where if you have more time to discuss something, to teach something, you're not, it's like every class situation is panic mode all the time. We don't have time.
Exactly.
There's a test coming. It's just
And
constant panic.
the kids are not creating. Kids are meant to think and create.
Right,
Those are the two things they are not doing in school. They were told to not think. They were told
right.
to regurgitate what they're being taught, and they're told to not create. And they're told to sit. So those three things create a what do you call it? Pandemic of ADHD. But if you have them moving and thinking and doing, probably a lot of that would go away. And if you do the sensory adjustments, then even more of it would go away. And suddenly you won't have so many kids being diagnosed because it's not pathological; it's just being kids. and none of them have. If you have associative thinking, it's not a pathology. It's a different kind of thinking. So a lot of that would be eliminated if they were doing those teaching skills instead of stuff, and having kids move around and do and create, and everyone do what they excel at. God has given us all different brains, and we have different brains because the world needs different brains. You need a person who's going to want to be a plumber. You need a person who's going to want to be a rocket scientist. You're going to need a person who's going to be an artist. And you need a person who's going to be a writer. And you're going to need a psychologist. All those require totally different educational systems. And they're trying to put it in a mold. And most people are not going to fit in that mold. Only the median patient children are going to fit into that mold. And everything else, whether you're too cognitively gifted or you're slow or whatever they want to diagnose or categorize, as you're not going to fit into that mold. And if your parents are fighting and you have problems at home, then you're not going to be able to fit into that mold either, because you're just sitting there and you're going to think. So, I mean, there's so many factors that are causing learning challenges, and they're not being addressed. But if I wouldn't say never medicate, I would, who am I to say such a thing, right? I'm not qualified, and I'm not, and there are people who could help. But I would say with 100% recommendation on my part that if a child has attention issues or things like that, first exhaust checking sensory challenges. Exhaust those things. See what's going on emotionally. See what's going on at home. See what's going on if they're missing learning strategies. Check those things before. And if none of those things, after you've regulated all of them, then you might need medication. But try to get to the root of the problem as opposed to just treating the symptom right out and ignoring all that. Because it's not going to make it better. Mm-hmm. It's just going to cause whatever, maybe. And I know so many kids who feel so sick from those medications. And so many kids have gone on to addiction from those medications. It's a crime, and no less that no one is searching for the responsibility of the educational system and the psychological association should be that the minute the child does something is off, try and assess not what they're not doing, not the didactic assessments, the reading slow. Something that's going to give you tools. What's going? Do a sensory profile. Do instead of a regular hearing test where they can hear beeps, check for auditory processing, which is a different thing altogether. That's functional hearing and functional speech. Check for visual processing. Check for tactile stimulation. If their clothes are itching them, if they're hot, if they're having issues with that, they can't learn. Exhaust those. Observe. Put a full questionnaire for the parents and for the child. As much as if they're verbal, they can tell you. Once you try and regulate all those things, if something's not working, then go down that road. But they don't do the homework first, and they certainly don't start where they should be starting.
Yeah, and in my opinion, those should be repeated. If you do the sensory tests when they're little, try again when they're mid-puberty, right? Because the brain has a significant change during puberty. Try again post-puberty, because our sensory differences evolve with time,
Absolutely.
especially
Like
depending
spectral
on,
tickers and with hormones, they change colors.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I would take what you're saying a little bit further,
Okay.
and I would say that it should be ongoing. A parent can look at their child every day and try and figure out. And that's what I did with my kids. At the end of the day, I would always try and say, what happened today? Where were they off? What triggered them to have a overload or a meltdown? Or what worked? What didn't work? What are they feeling? Try and ask them. I mean, my parenting tip, if it's possible, it's not always possible. It's certainly not in today's day and age. But I tried 3 times a day to make sure I was around my kids, even if I had to go back out to work. But I would always try, like in the morning, to send them off. When they came home from school for those 10 minutes, to just be there, stick some food on the table, and shut my mouth and listen. And maybe they ask, not too many, because oftentimes when they come home, they spew. They keep themselves together during the day, and then they come home and they just melt down, spew, tell stories. Just have someone listening at that end of the day, and then 10 minutes before they go to sleep, is for as long as you can get away with it, sit on the edge of their bed and shut your mouth and listen, and you'd be really surprised what comes out. And then start asking some questions, if they to in response to what they say. But if you can give at least some of that to your child, particularly those after school and before going to sleep. I'm talking as long as you can get away with that. Means if you can get away with it for up to teenage age, you know what I mean? You'll understand, you can assess what's going on with them. And then you try and figure out what they need, what those adjustments you need to make as many times as you can. It doesn't require going to the professionals who are going to sort you out, because they're probably going to confuse you more than going to sort you out. Sorry. But it's the simple stuff you can do at home as a parent. Just look, listen, and then when they start saying what's happening, then try and figure out what tools you can give them to help. And that's what I've done. Especially if you have any kind of kid with any difference, you got to do damage control every day, because what's going to happen to them in school, what's going to happen to them socially because of those differences they need somebody who's going to just listen. No
Yeah, and then
phone, no
we
nothing.
grow up
Listen.
feeling a dissatisfaction with self, right?
Sure,
Right? That's
sure.
dissatisfaction is like the good end of the
Yeah,
damage that
it
happens when we
is.
grow up
The kid
constantly
says, why am I slow?
wrong.
Why are you slow? Maybe you're not slow. Maybe you just think deeply, and that requires more time. Most people don't do that. Do you know what a gift is? I mean, they say that about Einstein or who else was it? They said that he was always slow. He was thrown out of school. Edison. Um, uh, None of them were slow. They were busy. They thought deep. But in school, no, you're slow. You got to answer within a few seconds. You got to think about it. Why should you answer so fast? You're not slow.
Yeah.
It's just getting
Oh my,
revved up. Sorry.
Jacki, I could talk to you for hours upon hours upon hours. But we have hit
Likewise.
the top of our hour together. I hope we can do this again because you
With
are
pleasure.
a tremendously deep well of knowledge and experience. Um, and I think such a gift to the neurodivergent, neurodistinct community.
Thank
Um,
you.
I hope
I tell you,
we can do this
I
again.
tell you what, I'm happy anytime. And I'm doing what I'm doing because if we get back to faith just for a minute, in Judaism, the a belief that every person who comes down to this earth has a mission. Okay, that's part of the Jewish philosophy, belief system. They will all have a mission. They all come down here for a different reason. And our task throughout life is to figure out what our mission is and then to try and carry it out. When I woke up after surgery and realized that all those things I'd been observing all my life, I now was experiencing, I realized, I think that's what my mission is. I think that's why God left me on this earth. That's why when the surgeon said, you should be here, you know what I mean? It's a miracle that you're alive. Uh, I think he left me here to be talking about this stuff, which is why I do what I do, right? Um, so that's why I am happy to do it. And that's why sharing and learning, and happy to come anytime and speak with you. Plus, I see we have a flow because we're equally in the same pool and with lots of, and we enrich each other, which is beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I feel very honored and blessed by our conversations.
Likewise.
So thank you. We will plan on doing more together.
Sure.
And I promise my audience we will make sure that there are links to resources of the different things that Jacki has spoken.
Mm-hmm.
And please get her book. Very,
If
very.
we can go on my website and blog, and if somebody is interested in booking a presentation, lecture, conference, whatever, please reach out. That's really where I want to spend time focusing on now that my book is out there, because I think just like what we did today, I have a very organized presentation about all these things to teach whoever wants to learn.
That's
Um,
wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Jacki.
Thank you.